Welcome to Idiosyncratic Fables. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Idiosyncratic Fables, where my primary focus is storytelling. Because everybody's got a story to share, and I want to hear yours. Before we get into this month's guest, a little bit of housekeeping for you. And of course, when I say that word, I remember back to podcasts where they also say that exact same word and people cringe. They're like, oh no, here comes like 10 minutes of sharing of blah, blah, blah. No. Mine's short, sweet, and to the point. I'm incredibly busy. I am blessed to have audiobook work all the way out to late June, which is awesome. I'm currently working on my first ever children's superhero book, which is super cute and very hilarious. I absolutely love it. And then as far as my writing goes, I have picked that back up again. And so my first manuscript, which is technically version 2.0, is now at 41,500 words. So that takes care of things for me on this end, but I'm really excited to introduce all of you to my guest today, Mr. Neal Arango. Neal, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show.
Of course, sir. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, it is always a pleasure to, one, talk with you, and two, game with you, because you are our fearless leader slash DM for our online Pathfinder sessions.
I am that. Yes.
So on that thread, how long have you been playing tabletop RPGs?
Boy. Probably about 20 years or so. Maybe more than that, actually. And
Okay.
different forms of it. I would say like 25 years.
Okay. What was your first ever game slash session?
First ever game that I tried, and this isn't exactly a tabletop RPG, it's more of a board game, but it's a game called Hero Quest. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Yes.
Hero Quest.
Oh, yeah.
That was like kind of like my personal intro to like, any kind of like tabletop gaming. But my brother was actually an avid Dungeons and Dragons player, like way before that. Like he started playing D&D like when like the original red box came out, and he
Right.
was only like, I think he was like 10 years old when he started playing that. And I'm like, and now that like blows my mind because my son is 10 years old, and I'm like, he has like no interest in like playing any kind of games like that. I'm like, how the hell did he get into it?
Right.
And I always remember kind of like looking at this stuff, and like my brother had like all the books and like all like the miniatures, and he used to paint his own miniatures.
Nice.
And I'm like, I was way too young. So I was like, at that time, I remember just like, wow, okay. I used to like sneak into his room and play with his miniatures, like, not even knowing like what the hell was going on. And so I've
Awesome.
always kind of known like D&D was like a thing. I just didn't really know that much about it until I was like in my late teens. And then like I remember the first game I tried to get into, and I didn't want to do like, I wanted to be different from like my brother. He's like, oh, he plays D&D, I'm gonna try something different. And I tried to get into Shadowrun,
Yeah.
which I love that setting, but goddamn, the game system is like kind of like weird. I don't like it as much.
Yeah.
So I tried getting into that a little bit, and I tried running a couple of sessions. And it just didn't work out. I couldn't really wrap my head around it. And,
Sure.
and then like when D&D third edition came out, I was like in my 20s at that point. And then like, that was when my brother was like, hey, why don't you come game with us and play D&D? And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I guess I could give it a try. And then that was like my first experience playing D&D. And I was like, oh, this system is so much easier and better, and I love it. And that was kind of like,
That's awesome.
went from there.
Yeah, with Shadowrun, I've actually got a PDF, I think, of 5th edition.
Yeah.
And Dude, I tried going through that and reading. I'm scratching my head going, there is just so much
Yeah,
here. It is
it's
just
crazy.
so blasted confusing.
It's crazy.
For right now, I think my brain reverts back to kindergarten and go, "Oh, look at the cool pictures. Look at
Yeah,
that one."
man.
Because
I love the setting. I love the world. I love everything about it. But
Oh,
man, I
yeah.
just cannot like. I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's
I'm right
always
there with
like
you.
been like a goal of mine. Like one day I'm gonna run a Shadowrun game. I'm gonna do it because I have so many like cool ideas of like campaigns in the Shadowrun.
Right. Yeah, I'm exactly in the same mindset because me, given the choice between, you know, science fiction and like epic fantasy, I'm going to go science fiction hands down. And if you want to go to a subgenre, cyberpunk is what really calls me. I'm like,
Yeah,
dude, yes, just sign me up, please.
yeah, yeah.
So thinking back to your first D&D session, do you remember your first character you played for
Oh
3rd
yeah.
edition?
Oh yeah. I was a half elf ranger named Darwin Feldabar. um Yeah, he was. It was my. I didn't really. He didn't have much of a backstory, like, because it was my first game. So, like, I remember I did have like, I went with like the dual sword fighting ranger
Right, right.
style. And Yeah, that game went on for a little bit. It was pretty cool. I remember my brother wasn't. He's usually the GM, but he wasn't DMing that game. We let like another person in the group DM. So my brother was actually in the group as a player. He was playing a rogue. I had another guy who was playing a half orc monk, and somebody else was playing I think a wizard. No, I don't remember who the fourth person was, but
That's all right.
that doesn't matter. But I do remember that party was like very vividly, and it was cool. We had a lot of fun, and and we kind of went from there. We did a lot, and then we transitioned into Pathfinder when fourth edition came out, and everybody was like, D&D fourth edition is bad, and like 'cause Pathfinder was kind of like it's like a modified version of third edition. So people who enjoyed third edition kind of went to Pathfinder.
Yeah, we don't talk about 4th edition.
I actually
Insert
didn't mind. I did play a little bit of fourth edition. I thought it was kind of fun in a way, but yeah, it was not. It had its merits. I think it was more of like a tactical combat game. Like it was
Mhm.
like it really focused more on the tactical combat and less on like the role playing. I feel like.
Yeah, I think it was such a huge paradigm shift for a lot of the old school players that it just raised a big stink about 4th edition.
Yeah.
So, would you say that your love for tabletop RPGs and playing games, or more so getting into character, is what helps you do what you do now as an audiobook narrator?
Um, yeah, I in some ways, yeah, yeah. I mean, I do. I just love everything about tabletop RPGs. I do love the getting into character. I love role playing. I love telling stories, which is why I personally prefer being a GM over a player. But when I'm a player, I like to like do little side things, and I'll write up a little background. I'm like, hey, a little flashback I want to do for I want to talk about my character. Um, but I also love like the gaming part of it, and like leveling up your character and getting new abilities and getting to do new stuff when you're fighting monsters. And look at this cool new thing I could do, and
Yeah.
it's just so fun. But I love telling the story too as a GM. I love I'm not much, I don't really have the time to like write and homebrew. So I usually do a lot of like published adventures already, but I'd like to add my own little things to them also here and there. But yeah, and funny enough, the that playing D&D and Pathfinder is kind of one of the things that got me even thinking about doing audiobooks, because one of the things that I always do is I will give like all the NPCs like voices, and I'll do like different accents, and like, oh wait, here comes the goblin man. And
Right.
like the people that I've played with are always like, man, you really like get really into this stuff. You ever think about like doing voiceover or like acting? I'm like, I do have an acting background also. I never really pursued it, but I was like, yeah, I thought about it, but I don't really have time to do it now. And then I was like, as like an avid reader, I just kind of also thought about like, huh, what about like audiobooks? Is that a thing I could do? I don't know. So I kind of looked into that,
Yeah.
and here we are.
That's awesome. What was the first audiobook you ever did?
Oh, for God's sakes, the first audiobook I ever did. So my introduction to audiobooks, I'm sure like many narrators was ACX. And, I discovered ACX and I'm like, let me, went through the search on books accepting auditions. And I'm like, I don't want to my first book to be like this long, like 20-hour thing that I'm going to like get halfway through and like figure out and like realize I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I picked like the shortest book I could find. And I landed on one that was like, I would barely call it a book. It was more like an article. It was like, it was like 12 minutes or something.
Okay.
And it was called Top 10 Sex Mistakes We All Make. And I swear to God, I saw that. I'm like, oh man, that's funny. I'm like, let me just audition for this one as like a joke. Like, I
Right.
didn't think I was actually going to get it. And then like I got the offer for it. And I'm like, holy shit. And I remember telling my wife, I'm like, I just got my first audiobook. It's called Top 10 Common Sex Mistakes We All Make. And she was like, what? Like, what the hell? I'm like, I know. So I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. I did it. And like, I remember like submitting it and like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So like, I
Right.
was, I like the specs. I didn't know like how to get it to the right specs at first. So I submitted it like the first time and it didn't meet like ACX specs. So it came back and I ended up submitting it like 3 times. And like the author was
Oh,
like,
man.
dude, do you know what you're doing? I'm like, no, I really don't. I think I'm like the third or fourth time I finally got it right, and it finally went through, and I was like, all right. Since then, I have learned a thing or two about how to submit audiobooks.
Well, I think so.
Thankfully, but that was my first audiobook narrating experience.
And how long have you been narrating?
Oh boy, like about 10 years now. Um,
That's
yeah, I
awesome.
did take like a couple of years off, actually. Um, So I did maybe like 10 or 15 books or so. And I did one book that I did for an author that like, he was really good. He really loved it. And then I decided to like take a break from it because I was doing mostly royalty share books because like I wasn't really getting at that time. I was new and I didn't really know what I was doing. I wasn't really getting a lot of the PFH jobs. So I was getting a lot of royalty share books that, of course, weren't really selling. So I wasn't really making money, but I was still enjoying it. It was fun. I was like, oh, cool. I got my name out there. I have a bunch of books. And I kind of stopped doing it when my daughter was born because I decided to, I left my job and was a stay-at-home dad for like a year or so. So I was like, you know what? Let me just put this whole audiobook thing to the side for a couple of years. And then that author, one of the authors that I worked with was like, hey, Neal, by the way, you still do audiobooks? He contacted me after like a year or so. And I was like, I mean, I kind of stopped, but I mean, I don't know. I guess I could start doing it. He's like, yeah, I'd really like you to narrate this book for me. And I was like, sure, why not? I picked it up again. I did that book and then after I did that book, I was like, let me try to do another one and another one. Like, you know what? Let me audition for a romance book. Like, I don't know. I hadn't done a romance book. So I'm like, let me do that. And then I got my first romance book gig. And then from there, I started just getting a ton of romance work. I'm like, I guess I'm a
Okay.
romance audiobook narrator now.
There you go.
But it's what's incredible is like I really had no plans to get back into audiobooks until this author reached out to me and had him do his book after like a year or two. And if it wasn't for him, I probably would never have got back into it. It's possible.
Okay. So, would you say that romance is your favorite genre to narrate?
I mean, no.
Okay.
But not that I don't like I enjoy narrating. What I like about no romance is like, the drama, because with somebody with an acting background,
Sure.
I like getting dramatic. And sometimes like I get really into the story when I'm narrating romance. And there's been times where I will be narrating a romance book and that literally brings me to tears.
That actually helps, I've heard.
Yeah, and I will, and there's probably been more than one occasion where like I am crying as I'm narrating my book.
I am also
But
guilty of this.
yeah, but I would probably say that my favorite thing to narrate is fantasy, just
Okay.
because I do like again, it goes back to my whole I like doing like voices and getting and creating like voices for crazy characters and getting to do accents. So in that vein, I have done a few romance fantasies or fantasy romance or romantasy as it's called, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love it. I do, but I would say like fantasy in general, whatever form that takes, is probably my favorite thing to narrate. Um, so like I will do a good fantasy romance any day of the week.
Awesome.
Kind of like combines like my two things that I'm
Sure.
really enjoying right now.
Now, do you read in your off time?
Um, not really at the moment. I used to be a huge reader. I used to love reading fantasy and sci-fi. But since I've, been very busy with audiobooks and with kids, it's
I
it
know how
hasn't really
that
left much
goes.
time for recreational reading, but I have listened to a couple of audiobooks here and there too. So
Okay.
I'll do that like if I'm a long car ride or I'm home doing, audiobooks. Boom. They are awesome.
All right. So, given that, that leads me to my next question. What would be your favorite genre to read or listen to, but not narrate?
Ooh. Ooh. But not narrate.
Right.
um that's a that's a that's a good question. I don't don't know. Because I mean, again, my favorite thing to read would definitely be fantasy sci-fi. I mean, I might say sci-fi would be something I'd like to read. I like to narrate that less than fantasy, only because sci-fi is usually a little bit more straight, and you have depending on what kind of sci-fi. Obviously,
Sure.
if we're talking like Star Wars with like lots of crazy aliens, or something like The Expanse, which is like very serious and straight. I would probably have less fun narrating that, but I do love reading like science, like stuff that's like realistic and scientific. Oh, you know what? Thriller. We'll say thriller too, like a
Okay.
good thriller book. I love to read a thriller or a mystery. Not that I wouldn't like narrating that. It's not on my top
I
tier
gotcha.
things to narrate.
So, in the thread of storytelling, then, do you happen to have a story with you or one from your memory that you'd like to share with the audience?
Oh boy, a story. Sure, I guess. I could talk about the thing that kind of got me into acting. So that's always been like a big passion of mine. I love
Sure.
performing. I love, the acting. When I was a kid, I remember like thinking like I want to be an actor. Like that's what I want to do. And my parents were always like, that's not a job. Like you can't, that's not a real thing. And I always I had this weird kind of like, I didn't want to be like a movie star. I didn't want to do it because I want to be like rich and famous. My whole thing with acting was like, I want to be immortal. That's, I want to like, when I die and I'm gone from this earth, I want people to remember me for something, I
Sure.
mean, you look at like, here's a big name, but like somebody like Robin Williams, like this guy is gonna be living on for hundreds and not thousands. Well, I don't know. He's gonna be, people are gonna be talking. Like, think about like some of the old, John Wayne. Like, I'm not talking to that level, but like, here's a name I don't know that you even would know. Um, Andreas Katsoulis. You know who that is?
No, I've
Okay.
never heard of that.
Have you ever seen the show Babylon 5?
Like, honestly, no, and it actually, I'm kind of ashamed to admit that.
That's okay. It's not a huge show, and that's why, but there is an actor in that show who does like one of the most amazing freaking performances um ever that I've seen. He was one of like my favorite all-time characters, and he sadly passed away a few years ago from lung cancer. And
Oh,
he's
no.
yeah, and he's famously like he played an alien. Babylon 5 is, it's kind of like a Star Trek kind of sci-fi series.
Okay.
And he played this alien that had like all this, he was kind of like this lizard kind of looking alien with like red and like black spots. And he was like he was a big smoker. And he was like famously like known for like going out and leaving the set and like smoking a cigarette in his full like costume. And people would be like, what the hell is like an alien out there just smoking a cigarette? And I just like always imagine like that's hilarious. But anyway, I just think about that guy because he's not like a super well-known actor, like he
Yeah,
was actually in The Fugitive. If you've seen this, I'm sure you've seen The Fugitive, Harrison
that I
Ford.
have. Oh,
He
yeah.
was the guy that played the one-armed man.
Oh, okay. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, again, not super well known, but like an amazing actor. And like he wasn't amazing in The Fugitive. He was just like he was there and like he was, he had like a pretty small part. But like if you watch Babylon 5, the performance this guy puts on is just outrageous. Like I like it gives me chills, like still to this day. I like watch some of his scenes. Like, this guy's amazing. And like I would love to have that kind of like, you know, be remembered for something like that, like a small thing that like has a fan following that people will be like, oh man, Neal was amazing in that.
Sure.
I always thought that would be cool. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of like my desire for going into acting.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And that kind of reminds me of another actor, Andy Tudyk, I think his name is.
Yes. Oh,
Um,
yes. He's awesome
yeah,
too.
to the best of my knowledge, he has never landed a major leading role. He's always
Yeah.
been a co-star, co-actor, what have you. But I remember watching an interview where he says it really is just about the acting. And so when people call you into a studio and say, "Hey, we have this kind of, nonsensical role and you
Yeah.
just need to come in and cluck like a chicken, can you do it?" You say yes.
Yeah.
Because how many opportunities do you have to
Yeah.
go into a studio and just go
Yeah.
like
And
that's
you know what? If there's like 100,000 people in the entire planet that like say, "Oh man, remember when Alan Tudyk was that chicken?"
yes.
Like,
I have to remind my kids every time we watch Moana, I'm like, remember the guy that's doing the chicken is also the same one you know from A Knight's Tale and Firefly. They're like, what? No way.
yeah,
I'm like, yep, same dude.
yeah, yeah,
Neal, thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been a fantastic opportunity just to sit and chat with you. I
yeah,
really
man. Of
appreciate
course,
you.
anytime, anytime.
For those that are listening and you're thinking to yourself, my, I need to hear more of Neal, or better yet, if you're an author and you want to hire Neal to narrate your next book, Neal, how can they get a hold of you?
You can visit my website, nealarangoaudio.com. Also on Facebook and TikTok. But on TikTok, you can find me under my romance pseudonym, Logan Anair.
Oh, Logan and Nair.
Yes, that is my alter ego.
You got a few minutes
My
to talk
I
about your
am
alter
Iron Man
ego?
moment. Whoa, whoa, no.
Do you have a few minutes to talk about your alter ego?
Sure, why not?
So, Logan and Nair, how'd you come up with that name?
That is actually an anagram. So I just kind of rearranged the letters of my name until I found one that I was like, oh yeah, Logan, and then let's just bloop, 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 bloop.
Well, I'll be. So I'm
Yep,
sitting here looking at your name in our recording platform going, son of a biscuit. It sure
yep,
is.
Yeah. Because I was like, I was trying to figure out like what's a cool. Should I try to make like a sexy name? And I'm like, no, let's not go crazy here. Let's just do something and just see how this works out.
Yeah. So Logan and Nair, well, I say it works for you. So
Yeah,
would it be fair to say that anytime somebody thinks Logan and Nair, they automatically think romance titles?
pretty much. Yeah, yeah. I don't think I've done any non-romance. Actually, there is one that I'm working on right now with my partner in crime, Lexi Evans. That's not so much romance, but it's kind of like it's kind of like a supernatural, like kind of adventure treasure hunt kind of situation. But we met this author at a book signing that we went to together in Salem last year. So
Okay.
she was like, "Hey, would you like to narrate the thing? Can you do a French accent? Because this pirate happens to be French." And we're like, "Yeah, I could do a French accent." I have done a book with a French character before, so I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not?"
Fantastic. It wouldn't happen to be Jean Baptiste, would it?
No, it is Jean Lafitte.
Jean Lafitte.
Yes,
Okay.
who's actually he's a real historical figure.
That he is.
Yeah.
Um, and I think Jean Lafitte, isn't that the same one who had a blacksmith shop named after him in New Orleans?
Yes. Yes, that's where the book actually takes place in New Orleans.
Outstanding.
Yeah, so like we were narrating this book now, me and Lexi, and we're kind of like, wow, you know what? Let's see if there's a book signing in New Orleans now, because now I want to go check it out and visit Lafitte's blacksmith bar.
I'm going to come back to you on that one when we go backstage, but we
Okay.
need to wrap up this episode.
Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining myself and Neal for today's episode of Idiosyncratic Fables. If you would like to come on the show and do what Neal has done and just share, little bits about who you are, your life story, or if there's a story near and dear to your heart that you want to just read for all the world to hear, you're more than welcome. This platform is for you because I've said it before and I'll say it again. Everybody has a story to share, and I want to hear yours. And so until I talk to you next time, peace be with you.